It started subtly, so subtly in fact that at first it seemed like an accident. A missing tomato here, a broken stem there. It was easy to blame the wind or a hungry squirrel, though something about it felt off. The garden had always been a point of pride. Rows of plump tomatoes, fresh basil, and bell peppers grown with care. It wasn't just about the vegetables. It was about the simple joy of waking up with the sun, hands in the soil, nurturing something from a seed into something vibrant and alive. But then it happened again. More tomatoes gone. A half-pulled carrot, left abandoned in the dirt like a warning. The realization was slow but undeniable. This wasn't nature. This was someone. A human hand had been in that garden, and whoever it was didn't just want the produce. They wanted control. The sense of violation crept in like a shadow. It wasn't just about the lost vegetables, it was about the feeling that someone somewhere thought they had the right to take from you without asking. And once you realize you're being targeted, you don't see your garden the same way. Suddenly, every rustle in the bushes at night sounds suspicious. Every footprint in the soil feels personal. This wasn't just a garden. It was a battleground, and the fight had only just begun. The betrayal deepened when the search for answers led straight to the very people meant to protect the community. The HOA board. At the next meeting, the homeowner raised the issue, hoping for support, maybe even a plan to catch the culprit. Instead, what they got was a room full of blank stares and smug smirks, with the HOA president, Karen, leading the pack. She didn't offer concern. She didn't promise to look into it. She simply tilted her head, gave a condescending smile, and said something infuriating like, "Well, perhaps if your garden wasn't so excessive, it wouldn't be such a target." The words stung, not just because of their dismissiveness, but because they revealed something more sinister. This wasn't negligence. It was complicity. The board wasn't just ignoring the problem, they were part of it. Karen, in particular, seemed to revel in the discomfort, her words oozing with passive aggression, as though the real crime wasn't the theft. It was daring to grow something she deemed too bold for the neighborhood's cookie-cutter aesthetic. The meeting ended with no solutions, only warnings. Thinly veiled threats disguised as suggestions to scale back the garden for the sake of community harmony. It became painfully clear. This wasn't about vegetables. This was about power. And as the days passed, the pattern emerged like a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight back to the source. The garden wasn't the only victim. Other neighbors quietly admitted they'd faced similar pressures. A woman down the block had been fined for planting sunflowers that grew too tall. A retired couple received notices about their unsightly bird feeder. Even a young family had been told to repaint their front door a more neutral color after choosing a soft blue that Karen deemed too loud. It was all connected. A web of control spun by an HOA president who didn't enforce rules to protect the community but to bend it to her will. The garden wasn't targeted because it was messy. It was targeted because it was a symbol of independence. Every tomato, every sprouting herb, was a quiet rebellion against the HOA's grip. Karen didn't see a garden, she saw defiance. And in her mind, defiance had to be stamped out before it spread. Realizing this, the homeowner's anger shifted from confusion to clarity. This wasn't random, it was a campaign. A silent war waged with petty violations and bogus complaints, designed not just to control but to exhaust, to push people into submission one fine at a time. Then came the inspections. The sudden, unannounced visits from Karen and her HOA cronies. At first, it seemed coincidental, a routine check of property lines, a casual stroll through the neighborhood. But the timing was too perfect to be random. Every time a new tomato ripened or a row of peppers blossomed, Karen appeared, clipboard in hand, scanning for anything that could be labeled a violation. And of course, the notices followed. Letters accusing the homeowner of improper landscaping, excessive use of non-approved plant species, and the audacious claim that the garden might attract vermin to the community. It wasn't about rules, it was about psychological warfare. Each letter wasn't just a warning. It was a strike, a way to chip away at the homeowner's resolve, to make them question if all this effort was worth it. Would it be easier to just rip the garden out and comply? Was a handful of vegetables worth the constant stress of fighting back? But giving in wasn't an option. Because every petty violation wasn't just a piece of paper, it was Karen's way of saying, I own this place. You're just living in it. And if the homeowner caved now, what would stop her from coming for the next neighbor, and the next? This wasn't just about tomatoes anymore. This was about standing firm in the face of unchecked authority. So the plan was born, not out of spite but out of necessity. If Karen wanted to play games, the homeowner would play smarter. The garden transformed, not in size but in strategy. Outwardly, it looked tame, a carefully curated row of ornamental flowers, all perfectly within HOA guidelines. But hidden behind clever landscaping and trellises were the real stars of the show. Rare heirloom vegetables, fiery peppers, and thorny vines, all legal, but strategically planted to toe the line between compliance and defiance. Each plant was a silent protest, a reminder that control only works if people allow themselves to be controlled. The most satisfying part. Karen didn't even realize. She walked past the garden, smugly satisfied that her pressure had tamed the homeowner, never noticing the quiet rebellion blooming just beneath her nose. It was a victory, not just of gardening but of resilience. The homeowner wasn't just growing vegetables anymore. They were growing a movement, planting the seeds of resistance one root at a time. The plan was set, but the real test was yet to come, because the garden wasn't just a silent rebellion anymore. It was bait. The homeowner knew Karen wouldn't stop. People like her never did. They didn't just want to win, they wanted to crush. They wanted obedience disguised as order. So, the next move wasn't about protecting the garden. It was about exposing the truth. With the help of a bit of clever thinking, the homeowner set up a hidden camera. Not just any camera, but a small, discreet one tucked inside a decorative garden gnome. To the untrained eye, it was just another quirky lawn ornament, blending into the carefully manicured landscape. But behind its painted eyes, a tiny lens waited, recording everything. Night after night, the garden stood still until it didn't. One evening, just past midnight, the rustling of leaves and the faint crunch of gravel broke the silence. And there she was, Karen, creeping through the garden with a flashlight in one hand and a pair of gardening shears in the other. She wasn't just inspecting anymore, she was destroying. The camera caught every calculated snip of a tomato vine, every ripped leaf. She even pocketed a few tomatoes, bold as ever, as if taking the very produce she claimed was a community hazard gave her some twisted satisfaction. The sight was infuriating, not just because of the stolen vegetables, but because it unmasked Karen for what she truly was. This wasn't about rules, it was about domination. And now there was proof. But sometimes in battles like these, help comes from unexpected places. The homeowner wasn't alone, they just didn't know it yet. A few days later, while trimming the now damaged garden, a voice came from over the fence. Soft, cautious, but firm. It was Margaret, an older neighbor who had lived in the community long before Karen's reign of terror began. Margaret had always been quiet, the kind of person who kept to herself to avoid trouble. But that day, something in her broke. She leaned in close and whispered, "You're not the first. She's done this before." And just like that, the floodgates opened. Margaret told stories of Karen's long history of harassment, neighbors fined for hanging wind chimes, gardens ripped up for being too colorful, and families pushed to sell their homes after relentless violations wore them down. Margaret even revealed something chilling, that Karen seemed to have a pattern, often targeting people she thought were too independent, the ones who didn't bend easily to her will. The homeowner realized that this wasn't about a single garden. It was about control, a long-standing abuse of power masked as community care. Karen didn't just want to enforce the rules, she wanted to own the neighborhood. And Margaret's voice, once quiet with fear, now trembled with long-suppressed anger. This fight wasn't just personal anymore. It was a battle for everyone Karen had ever bullied into silence. The breaking point came when Karen crossed a line so bold it stunned the entire neighborhood. A formal letter arrived. Not just another petty violation but a final warning. The HOA, under Karen's authority, declared that the homeowner's garden was a health hazard, and would be forcibly removed in 48 hours if they didn't comply. The letter accused the garden of attracting pests, violating landscaping rules, and being unsightly. All fabricated claims with no evidence. It wasn't just a threat, it was an ultimatum. Karen wanted to make an example out of the homeowner, to show the rest of the neighborhood what happened when you dared to push back. This wasn't about a garden anymore. It was about breaking someone's spirit. But instead of fear, the homeowner felt something else: defiance. The garden wasn't coming down, not without a fight. And this time, the battle wouldn't be waged in the dirt. It would be fought in front of the entire community. But the homeowner wasn't about to face Karen alone. In secret, they started rallying the neighbors. It began with quiet conversations, sharing the hidden camera footage with a few trusted people, slipping copies of Karen's threatening letters under doors. One by one, stories poured out. The couple fined for a bird feeder. The family forced to repaint their front door. The elderly man harassed about his garden gnome collection. It wasn't just one person's war. It was a neighborhood uprising waiting to happen. And that's when the plan evolved. The homeowner proposed something bold: a community garden protest. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down began planting bold flowers in their yards, hanging vibrant decorations, and staking signs that read, "Our homes, our gardens." What started as a private battle blossomed into a collective stand against Karen's tyrannical grip. It wasn't just a garden growing, it was a movement. And for the first time in years, Karen's power seemed to tremble. But perhaps the most satisfying move of all wasn't the protest. It was the decoy garden trick. While Karen prepared to inspect the garden one last time, expecting to see wilted plants and forced compliance, the homeowner had a surprise waiting. A decoy garden had been set up, perfectly manicured, lined with HOA-approved flowers and neatly trimmed shrubs. It was a facade, a showpiece of everything Karen claimed to want. But hidden behind clever trellises and strategically placed greenery was the real garden, thriving, bold, and untouched. The hottest peppers, the plumpest tomatoes, and the tallest sunflowers stood proudly, shielded from Karen's view. As Karen strutted into the yard for her final inspection, clipboard in hand, she smirked at the sight of the compliant garden, thinking she had finally won. Little did she know, just beyond her line of sight, the true spirit of rebellion bloomed brighter than ever. It was a moment of quiet victory, not just for the homeowner, but for everyone who had ever felt Karen's grip on their freedom. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, the roots of resistance had taken hold. The plan was in motion, but the real storm was about to break. Karen may have thought she won by forcing the garden to comply, but what she didn't realize was that the homeowner had one last move. A move that would expose her for the manipulative, power-hungry tyrant she truly was. It all started with a public unmasking. The homeowner, with the support of a growing number of neighbors, decided to do something bold: host a community gathering. Not just a friendly get-together, but a carefully orchestrated event, designed to show everyone exactly who Karen was behind that polished, rule-obsessed facade. Under the guise of a garden appreciation day, neighbors were invited to tour the newly compliant garden and celebrate community spirit, all while secretly preparing for the big reveal. Hidden speakers were placed around the garden, ready to play the unedited audio from the hidden camera, capturing Karen's midnight raids, her cruel remarks about other neighbors' homes, and her smug satisfaction as she destroyed the very garden she condemned. The plan was simple: let Karen think she's attending a harmless community event, only to watch her own words and actions echo through the crowd like a bombshell. And then the moment came, Karen's meltdown. It was a warm afternoon, and the garden was full of neighbors, some curious, some cautious, all fed up with Karen's reign. She arrived, clipboard in hand, already scanning for violations, a smug smile plastered across her face. But then, without warning, the hidden audio played. Karen's voice crackled through the speakers, her mocking laughter as she tore at tomato vines, her condescending remarks about getting rid of these people who don't belong, and her threats to make life unbearable for anyone who dared to step out of line. The crowd fell into a stunned silence. Karen's smile evaporated. Her face flushed a deep crimson as the reality of the situation hit her. Neighbors she had bullied for years were now staring at her, not with fear, but with disgust. Karen tried to shout over the audio, waving her clipboard like a weapon, accusing the homeowner of illegally recording her, claiming the tapes were doctored. But it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no going back. It wasn't just a meltdown, it was a public unraveling. What happened next sent shockwaves through the community. A call for justice. In the days following Karen's public humiliation, the homeowner, along with their newfound allies, officially filed a motion with the HOA board to hold an emergency election. The goal was simple: remove Karen from power. But what made this moment even more powerful wasn't just the paperwork. It was the neighbors coming together. The once quiet community now buzzed with purpose. Long-silenced voices finally spoke up, sharing their stories of Karen's unfair fines, sudden inspections, and backhanded threats. An elderly couple revealed how Karen had fined them repeatedly for paint discoloration, only for the community to realize Karen's discoloration was just the natural wear of time. A single mother tearfully recounted how Karen pushed her to replace her non-compliant fence, a cost so high it nearly forced her to sell her home. This wasn't just a call for a new election. It was a community rising from the ashes of Karen's cruelty. The neighbors weren't just fighting for a garden anymore. They were fighting for their freedom. As the emergency meeting approached, Karen fought back harder than ever. She flooded the homeowner and several other vocal neighbors with frivolous HOA violations. Letters arrived almost daily, accusing them of everything from excessive garden decor to noise disturbances for simply hosting gatherings. Karen even tried to label the garden appreciation event as an unauthorized community gathering, claiming it broke HOA rules. But this time the scare tactics didn't work. The neighbors didn't cower, they united. They documented the bogus violations, gathered more evidence, and prepared to turn Karen's own weapons against her. The homeowner, along with several allies, compiled a thick folder of Karen's most absurd fines, pairing each one with a counterclaim or clear proof of her abuse of power. The message was clear. This was war, and Karen was no longer fighting a single person. She was up against an entire community ready to reclaim its voice. And then came the final showdown. The HOA emergency meeting was packed, not just with board members, but with neighbors who once would have stayed home out of fear. Karen sat at the head of the table, her usual air of superiority cracking beneath the weight of the stares and whispers. The homeowner calmly presented their case. The hidden camera footage of Karen's trespassing and vandalism, the stack of unfounded violation letters, and the testimonies of wronged neighbors. Every piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of Karen's authority. The HOA board, once blindly loyal to Karen, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, realizing their leader wasn't a protector of community standards. She was a tyrant using the rules as weapons. And when the vote was called, a unanimous decision to remove Karen from her position, the room broke into quiet applause. Karen's reign was over. She sat there, stunned and speechless, as the power she clung to for years slipped through her fingers like sand. But the most powerful moment wasn't Karen's downfall. It was the neighborhood's transformation. With Karen gone, the community didn't just return to normal. It blossomed. Gardens grew wilder and more vibrant. Neighbors gathered more freely, sharing seeds, recipes, and stories. The homeowner's garden, once a target of Karen's wrath, became a symbol of resistance and renewal. And at the next HOA meeting, a new motion was passed, allowing for a community garden project where residents could plant whatever they wished, without fear of unjust fines. It wasn't just about gardening anymore, it was about freedom, about reclaiming what was stolen, about proving that a community's strength doesn't come from one person's authority, it comes from people standing together. The fight wasn't just about plants in the soil, it was about roots of rebellion that had grown deeper than anyone could see.